Hello, my name is Neil Scherer. Many of you know me from my sports displays, which are admired and loved not just by sports fans, which I always assume would be the case, but equally, if not more so, by history and art lovers. In fact, many people call our sports displays an art form, which shouldn't really be a surprise, being that I've been in the art world for over 30 years, principally in American art, dealing with works from Bierstedt all the way to Basquiat, and now involved heavily in the new sexy form of art, the modern contemporary world. It's been exciting to see my works not just find wonderful homes with clients, which I always enjoy working with, but also now being displayed at retail stores around the country and in museums. Just finished a recent show at the Manitowoc Museum in Waterbury dealing with the great Red Sox-Yankee rivalry, and also a polo ground show at the Morris Jamel Museum here in New York. It's always nice and rewarding to hear the wows emanating through the gallery as they look through my works of not just my art, but also my sports work. It's a great combination, and it may be something that your company, yourself, another museum out there might be of interest. So let me go and show you, for some of you who don't know, an example of my sports tributes, which we actually call sports conversation art. So what we have here is an example of one of our pieces. Again, what I try to do is, unlike the memorabilia world, which sort of focuses on a single item, which is great, a single ticket, a single program, a single autograph, I join many unique, authenticated items together to tell a story. And here we're telling the story of Roger Maris breaking Babe Ruth's record. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have an original wire photo of Maris as he steps on home plate, being greeted by Elson Howard after his 60th home run. Imagine now being tied with the great Babe Ruth. I can only imagine what was going through his mind. On the upper right corner is an image of Maris on a 61st home run, again his autograph. But what I find really exciting in this photo is the muscularity of his arms. You almost feel if the ball hits his arm and not the bat, it will still be a home run. In dead center, you have the great Babe Ruth, that's an original autograph, and the ticket below is from 1927, the day Ruth hit his 60th home run. Then we have the program from Maris' 60th home run, scored by somebody at the game. That's kind of a lost art. The program from Maris' 61st home run, scored by somebody at the game. The ticket from Maris' 60th, ticket from Maris' 61st. We tell the story of Roger Maris breaking Babe Ruth's record. This took over 18 months to do. Again, everything's authenticated. I'm also an attorney, so I love doing the research aspect of this. And if that's not enough, we have Tracy Stowler's autograph, the pitcher who gave up the home run, and Sal Durante, the kid who caught the ball, got $6,000. It was able to pay not only for his wedding, but also down payment of his house. So this is an example of what we do, and we're always working on new pieces, and also we're being commissioned to do pieces. So your favorite player might be Walter Payton or Sandy Koufax, or your favorite team might be the 67 Packers or Vince Lombardi. We're happy to do a piece for you, besides the ones that we're constantly working on. And now that we've shown you our sports pieces, let's transition into the art world, where I am right now at another showing at a exclusive club here in New York. As we move over into this direction, we're doing a show in New York, and one of the artists that we're featured is a gentleman named BEN GANZ, who's and the works are part of the Marty and Rena Scherer collection. My parents, my father met BEN GANZ probably 30 years ago, 40 years ago, way before his passing, and they hit it off, and my father loved his works, which are sort of reminiscent of Marin and Birchfield and that group, but yet very much his own. And my father would buy like 4, 5, and 10, and 20. Before you know it, our whole house was full of BEN GANZs, and we've always enjoyed them. They're New York of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and these are some examples that I really enjoy and fit very well with many of my sports shows. They're dealing with Yankee Stadium in the 1930s. This work happens to be Jerome Avenue and Yankee Stadium. Mr. GANZ is very nice to do this, but he basically indicated location of every one of his work, wonderful watercolors. This is 1936 Yankee Stadium. And what you see here that really caught my attention was the trains going around Yankee Stadium. Going to Yankee games in the late 60s, early 70s, I saw Mickey Mantle hit his 513th home run as a young kid, was that the trains were always blocked off by billboards. There's just a little gap. But in the 1920s, 1930s, when you were on the train, you got to see Babe Ruth, you got to see Lou Gehrig, you got to see some of those great Yankee teams. And I found that really interesting. I did not know that. And subsequently, I looked at photographs, and yes, indeed, there was this long gap for the people on the train to watch the games. As a kid, I probably would have yanked the cord and stopped the train, probably get in trouble, but it would have been worth it. So this is my 1936 Ben Ganz Yankee Stadium. As we move over here, this is another Yankee Stadium, one done in 1939, and what I picked up on when I saw this was the old Yankee Stadium, where I spent many days of my life with my father watching not just the Yankees, but the New York Football Giants. I saw Franz Harkin throw balls to Homer Jones, and if you notice, they have the pillars here. I was always a kid behind, I don't know how they got those tickets, but always the guy behind the pole doing this the whole game. So it was a little bit of exercise. Reminded me of that whatever you call that apparatus that was on the piano that went tick-tock. Anyway, so this is two examples of Ben Ganz's work. And as we move forward, we'll see more of his work dealing with Manhattan and the Bronx. In addition to Yankee Stadium, which I enjoyed so many days of my childhood, Ben Ganz also depicted other aspects of New York City of the past. One of them is the beloved Whitney Museum, which started in West 8th Street. And here is Mr. Ganz's depiction of the Whitney Museum in 1932, showing it as it was at that particular time. One thing that's exciting about this particular piece is that the Whitney Museum, one of the books on the Whitney here is the annual biennial exhibition records of the Whitney from 1918 to 1989. Lo and behold, we were really fortunate that they chose this particular piece to be one of their highlighted images of the Whitney in this particular book. And here we have some really wonderful, vibrant Manhattan scenes of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. One of the most iconic is the Washington Arch, Fifth Avenue, New York City, 1929. Again, thankfully, Mr. Ganz put the date and subject pieces mostly in the right corner. And to look at New York City at that time with the lampposts and that great color, and the sidewalks look a little awkward from this thing, but I guess that's how it was, or at least that's how the artist depicted it. In addition to this Washington Arch piece of 1929, we also have showing here Harlem River, 136th Street, 1935. We have Columbia University. We show the East River in 1938. Again, with those wonderful colors of the East River and the lampposts and the people walking through New York City. Here we have something that's really interesting. This is CCNY Stadium in 1937. Mr. Ganz actually graduates in City College of New York in 1930, but he can't get a job as in the chemistry area because of the Depression. And as much as he tries, he just can't get a position until he lands a position as an art teacher in the New York City school system. And what he would do, besides bringing fine art to the attention of young people, he would drive around New York. He called it his auto studio. And when something captures his attention, he would do these wonderful watercolors. And getting back to CCNY Stadium, this is really a historic stadium, which sadly was disbanded around the early 1970s. But it held wonderful concerts from George Gershwin, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald. And it also was in the late, right after World War II, there was a sad incident with Lieutenant Woodward, an African-American soldier, was unfortunately beaten up by policemen in South Carolina and lost his eyesight. And they had a big fundraiser for him at the stadium, which of course was, as I mentioned before, was called Lewis Shone Stadium. Joe Louis actually was an MC for that. And later on, Martin Luther King even spoke there. So again, it's a historic site that Mr. Ganz is nice enough to bring us attention to. Here is a police precinct. This is the 34th precinct on 181st Street and Wadsworth Avenue. I love the way it looks. I love the detail. I love the colors showing that area. So much activity with cars and people walking all over. And again, he did churches, he did the synagogues, he did the police precincts, he did high schools, he did colleges, he did sports stadiums, all of the New York that he loves so much, and we all do. In addition to Ben Ganz's New York City and Bronx scenes, which we all love and showed that vibrant New Yorker back of his day, he also got a chance once in a while to take a vacation. And some of his favorite places were Algonquin, Maine, the Hamptons, Provincetown. And here are some images of those from the 1930s. The Hampton Bays have been particularly of interest to many of the people who visit the show. And I just find these to be, exciting, fun, and another way to look at the history of these wonderful locations. This is an example of a still life of Ben Ganz, and what's interesting, this probably comes from his own home, because this is my Bronx home, 1932, and he's giving us a little insight into the house that he lived in the Bronx. As we bring Ben Ganz into the present, I'd like to just remind everyone that Mr. Ganz in the 1920s and 1930s and even the 40s, he was handled by galleries like ACA Galleries. He's been at museum shows, and museums have acquired works by Ben Ganz in the past, including the Bronx Museum, Museum of the City, New York. He was in a 1937 show with well-known artists like Reginald Mars, Louis Lozwick, George Aul, and people like that. And now we're back to his wonderful watercolors of the Bronx and Manhattan. And here are some wonderful examples. There's Riverdale, New York, where some of the wonderful private schools of Horace Mann and Fieldston and Riverdale are located. Here's one of the Washington Square from 1937. This, if you're a Bronx person and you know where Union Avenue and Ritter Place is, you probably won't find another work of this location. And this is one of my favorites as we move here. This is Southern Boulevard, 138th Street in the Bronx. And what we're showing is a tri-borough bridge just being built. Again, one of the things I like about Mr. Ganz, besides just his vibrant watercolors, is that they're really historic. They're giving us an insight of New York that doesn't exist now, or at least giving us the origins in some of our favorite locations. Moving on, we continue with the Bronx subject matter. Wilkins Avenue, 1936. Willis Avenue Bridge in 1930. How often have I gone on that as going to Yankee Stadium, back into the city. Here is Tinton Avenue, in the House Street in the Bronx in 1934. These wooden homes cannot be around anymore, so it gives you an idea of what it looked like back then. Speaking of things that aren't around anymore, this particular work of Ben Ganz of Harlem River almost looks like a shanty town. And now we know the evolution of New York, that no longer exists with all the new modern construction as it continues even to this day. So I found that really interesting. A piece of Yankee Stadium with the courthouse behind it in the 30s. And here is a work of the Bronx of Prospect and Jennings Street in 1934. Wintry day like we have today. And it's just, I think, a very nice example of old New York once again. In addition to having Ben Ganz in our recent exhibition of New York City, we also have some really prominent artists, including Guy Wiggins here, this nice gem of a small painting here, dealing with Wall Street, which he's known for, and we have the flags, you have Trinity Church, you have the Federal Building, you got the people, you got the cars, you got everything you want in this wonderful piece by Guy Wiggins, who was born in New York. His father, of course, was a well-known landscape artist. Mr. Wiggins is also one of the youngest members to have a work accepted by Metropolitan Museum of Art. You could easily tell he was influenced by French Impressionism and also by Child Hassam. And we were just fortunate enough to have this work here for this show. Here's a work by the artist Leon Delis. He was born in Vienna. He came to New York around the 1920s, and he loved his new city that he lived in, and he did a lot of pastels of New York City, basically the Chrysler Building. Here we have a wonderful oil, and with this lighting here, it becomes very dramatic of the city. It almost looks like the American flag colors, which he sometimes used, and also the work by Delis. Some people comment, reminds them of a Batman movie or Gotham City. It's one of our pieces here that really brings a lot of attention. Now we show a monumental work by the artist Ernest Feeney. Mr. Feeney is born in Germany. He wants to escape it during World War I, 1912 or so. He goes to Holland, and eventually ends up in America and becomes an American citizen. And here I think he's paying homage to his new city. 120 Wall Street, 40 Wall Street being built, the Singer Building, the Woolworth Building, the Brooklyn Bridge. He's really giving you a great view of New York City. This gentleman had a tough night, but this guy is looking at the promise of the city that Ernest Feeney now is a member of, and I think it's just showing the energy, the magnetism, and also what's going through his mind, this gentleman, as he looks at this great scene of New York. Again, this was done in 1931. As we move on in this exhibition, here is another Guy Wiggins, and this is of Columbus Circle. And again, you got the flags, you got this wintry scene. What I also like are the cars and the vehicles, giving you a sense of the 1920s and 1930s of New York. And again, you can see the influence once again of French Impressionism and Child Hassel. After looking at another wonderful Guy Wiggins, a winter scene of New York, well, eventually we're rewarded and spring and summer come. And here is a work giving us a beautiful beach day, and this happens to be the Staten Island. This is by Cecil Bell, an artist who was born in Seattle. He comes to New York as an engraver, an illustrator, and eventually he gets out to Staten Island. And here's just a painting that you want to jump in there and just enjoy that wonderful warm weather. It's so colorful and so exciting. Now we come across a work by Johann Bertelsen, who was born in Copenhagen, and he comes to America, a very theatrical guy, was in shows and also was an opera singer. Eventually becomes a painter, thankfully, and he's known more for his winter scenes. I actually like the nocturnal scenes more, in my judgment. And here's one of the United Nations, probably, I believe, like in the late 40s or early 50s, right after the UN was just built. And you know, I've never seen it that well lit. Is it artist liberty? Maybe, but maybe that's how it was a celebratory day when the UN was first open, or July 4th celebration. Now we come across an artist that's really associated in New York, Reginald Mars. He was born in Paris, comes to America, goes to Yale. He becomes an illustrator and also a writer for the New York Daily News. He's known for his burlesque women, risque New York, gritty New York, and here he's doing an example of looking at the New York City scape here on June 8th or June 5th, 1937 from Bedloe's Island, which I believe is called Liberty Island these days, and it's another wonderful example of a New York City subject. Now we come to another Johann Bertelsen. You can never go wrong with the Brooklyn Bridge, what an iconic landmark for New York City, and this is Moonlight over the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, I love his nocturnal scenes and all the activity in the harbor with all the smoke emanating from the various ships and boats in the harbor. Just wonderful New York City scene. Now we come to an artist, Martin Kalin, an artist from Philadelphia, studied under with Robert Henry and people like that. And here we have a really kind of a funky work on paper by Mr. Kalin of Coney Island. And if you're talking about Coney Island, it should be a little bit funkier. Great colors, wonderful imagery, fun to see all the folks and having a great time at Coney Island, and the American flag scattered about. And we are fortunate enough to have two brothers in our show. One is Reynolds Beale and one is Gifford Beale, and they both were students basically at William Merritt Chase. And the work we have here of Reynolds Beale depicts New York probably in the early New York, probably actually done in the 1900s, 1910 area. And we're very fortunate to get a look at old New York City here. Sandwiched between these two wonderful pastels by Leon Delis, an artist we spoke to earlier with the oil, the dramatic oil painting. These depict the Chrysler Building in downtown New York. We have now this Gifford Beale, and some people say, Neil, you know, they may wonder why this is in a New York City themed show. Some people have thought it might be Central Park, but I think it's a stretch. It's called Fête, Holiday Celebration. It may be just a generic view of the artist. It may be upstate New York, or I acquired it in New Orleans, but I'll tell you why it definitely belongs in a New York City show. It's a two-sided painting. It's kind of fun. Here you got Central Park, and that's definitely New York. And so it's funny, when I first came out of law school, I worked for a gentleman named Tom Carvello, who always made the point of buy one, get one free. That's probably how you could look at this painting if it becomes part of your collection. Here we have an interesting painting by Sheldon Penoyer. Mr. Penoyer was actually one of the monument men that George Clooney in a recent movie made famous, the gentleman in the military who sought after and found art that was stolen by the Nazis. Mr. Penoyer was a lifelong member of the military. Sadly, he died in a car accident. He was also members of some distinguished clubs, including the Union League Club. And here we have a nice example of Sutton Place, probably in the 1940s, 1950s. And here's a work by Lee Jackson, born in New York, studied at the Art Students League, and he's doing his really fun painting titled Jiggerbugging in New York City with these flags, and looks like maybe the park, and just a nice example by this artist. And one of our final pieces I'll be showing you today at the exhibition is a work by Jerome Myers, children having fun in the park. It's West 68th Street, and get to see the west side of New York in the background. Just a painting that really fits into this New York City theme show. For those of you who would like to have a Ben Gantz in your own personal collection, or for a museum that would like to add him as a featured artist, or just to have one for yourself, or for those companies that I've worked with in the past who would like to have a nice New York City show, feel free to contact me, and I'd love to work with you.